Hello, and welcome to Abby Lee Wellness, a place for sensitive souls to feel grounded and at ease as you learn everyday tools and insights to live your life most inspired. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Abby Lee Wellness Podcast. Today's episode is really special. I get to talk with Christian Snuffer, who is a psychedelic somatic therapist and owner and founder of attunement, psychotherapy, and psychedelic healing. So I know this will be interesting for a lot of people. And when I reflect on my intentions and my purpose in this world and what called me to doing this specific episode, is it feels important for me to connect with and share others who are on this path of vulnerability, who are on this path of really getting to know yourself, which then ultimately allows you to show up as your most radiant, authentic version of yourself, which makes a profoundly positive impact on those around you. And who doesn't want that? And to be honest, it feels extra nice to see men doing this stuff too, so that's a big part of what compelled me to reach out to Christian. So you get to hear his journey of how growing up in a high-demand religion affected his relationship with his body, what it looks like to be dissociated with your body, how modern therapy avoids talking about the spiritual, what it means to be embodied, and how plant medicines can help us get there. And my favorite part is about 1 hour in or so, where we talk about what is at the root of all people's issues that can get cloaked in a bunch of modern day diagnoses, when the answer is actually something really simple. And just remember, we are all on this path together, guys. We're all living in the exact same world right now, doing the best we can with what we have. So I hope this is insightful for you. I hope it feels relatable for you. I hope it feels intriguing, validating, and comforting as you listen to Christian's journey to embodiment. All right, welcome today to the episode. I have Christian Snuffer here, if you want to say hello.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me, Abby.
You're welcome. Thanks for being here. I was thinking to help kind of drop into the space together to do just like a 1 to 2 minute meditation, a little bit of breath work just to settle in, because I feel like there's just so much about you that you have to offer, and I want to be able to hold space for that. And so I feel like I just need to kind of just like drop in together if you're open to that.
Yeah, I love it. That sounds awesome.
Okay, so for those who are listening to, if you can take a moment and, if you're driving, keep your eyes open, but if you're cooking or moving around or doing something where you feel like you can just kind of adjust your posture a little bit, finding a nice tall spine and relaxing the shoulders down. And we can take a nice, big, refreshing inhale into the body and let out a grounding, soothing exhale out of the body. And doing 2 more of those, taking a nice, refreshing, rejuvenating inhale into the body. And then letting out a soothing, grounding exhale, just kind of letting yourself drop into this space together. And allowing 1 more nice inhale into the body. And letting out a soothing exhale. So thank you, Christian, for being here today. I felt very called to reach out to you, to have you a part of the podcast today for many reasons. And I just wanted to thank the people who are listening who know you personally and who are supporting you by listening to this podcast. And I am excited to see what comes of it. So I wanted to start off and ask you, how do you know me and how do I know you? Like, where does that kind of start
Yeah.
in your brain?
Yeah, totally. Well, first off, thank you again for having me, and thank you for that drop in. That was really nice. I haven't done that on other podcasts, so that's needed. Okay, so where did you and I meet? So I moved to the big island of Hawaii in 2015 to take a job at a wilderness therapy program, horticultural therapy program called Pacific Quest. And I had probably been there for maybe about a year, maybe a little bit more when you showed up. So is that correct timeline? Were you there in around like 2016 or was it all the way in 2017?
I 2017 is when I
Okay.
think I got there.
Okay. Yeah.
July 2017.
Great. So yeah, I had been there for a couple of years at that point. So I was a field guide. I think when you arrived, and I had the pleasure of actually being one of your trainers, which was
Yeah.
cool. That was the first and only opportunity I had to do a training at PQ. And a lot of the people in your group, I still have really kind of a special place in my heart because really that was the first time I'd been asked to be in like a kind of professional training setting. And so it was really cool to be able to hopefully impart a little bit of knowledge to you on how that program worked and how things functioned. And then from that point, we were on the same shift for people who aren't really unfamiliar with that. Like you work a week on and a week off. So there's two shifts. You don't really interact with the other shift except for this trade out. So fortunately, we were on the same shift. And so I think we got to work together. I don't remember if that was like, I don't know, I remember how many opportunities we had for that, but I definitely remember seeing you around and watching you grow as a guide. And there's so much I could say about PQ, so many good things, but that's where our relationship started.
Nice. Thank you for sharing that. For me, when I moved to the island and so I kind of came into that role, or that dynamic where you were the teacher. So yeah, you led this epic training, and it's so hard. Like, how do we even get across
Right.
what that is? But it's very magical. There's like ceremony, and it's vulnerable, and there's a lot of emotions and personal growth, and that are involved in this program that you helped elicit as our training. Like we were kind of like the students going through this initiation into being trained as a guide for this wilderness horticulture therapy program. And
Mhm.
I remember I just saw you as a very magical human. I was very impressed by your skills and your leadership. And I would see you out in the field I just remember seeing you with like a shovel and like digging into the earth with boys, teenagers that are like, screw you. And you're just out there doing a phenomenal job. And that's kind of like just some of my first memories of you. And then I was thinking of sort of this epic story I wanted to say that I'm curious as to how you'll receive it.
Okay.
If you're open to hearing
Yeah,
it.
let's hear it.
Okay, so the last time I saw you was in last October, so about a year ago from recording this episode right now, and that was for Phil, my life partner. For people who are listening, I think it's episode 5 where I talk about the grief and sudden loss of my life partner. And Christian, you drove up here from Salt Lake City to be a part of that ceremony. And when I asked you, I asked you during that ceremony if you would be the one that starts the fire. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
When
Yeah, I
and
do.
I was thinking of why I asked you that. I was extremely intentional about having you be the one that started the fire after I held, this ceremony where everyone shared one by one, like their memories of Phil and how Phil all impacted us. And then once everyone was done sharing, you then just kind of like you took on your role and you very effortlessly just went in there and started the fire. And then we transitioned into like everyone being around the fire. And that just, I don't know, there's something about the fire that felt really like that was your role. And I just really wanted you to do that. And I see you maybe not even as like, I don't know if fire starter is the word that resonates with me, but more like fire keeper, the keeper of the fire. And I remember you posted an Instagram reel about fire too, and I was like, oh my gosh, yes, like that's it. But I live on the lands of the Salish tribe, and they have this word in their language. There's nowhere online that helps me figure out how to pronounce it. I just have a book that helps me say the language, but it's something like swoopa'am, and it literally means fire setter or makes fire. And this is the person in the tribe that they assigned that was like the keeper of the fire, the knowledge of all of fire. They used fire to help shape the lands, and they used this knowledge that was passed down for thousands and thousands of years of how to properly hold the fire so that humans knew how to shape the land using fire to help rejuvenate the soil. And they knew that if you started a fire 25 years from now was when you would get a really good huckleberry harvest. The huckleberries are really big out here in Montana, and that would help feed the grizzlies and the elk and the humans and the small mammals. And so all of that, this whole story, just like I don't know, I just see you as a fire keeper. And that's why I wanted you to start the fire at Phil's ceremony. But I realized all I said to you is, hey, will you start the fire? And you're like, yes.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I'm coming from with wanting to have you on here. I just think there's so much I just think you're a beautiful human. And thanks for being here.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Abby. That's special. That's humbling. And it was an honor. And it's so interesting you bring that up. On the shelf behind me here in my office, I have one of the little fire starter bundles that Phil had made.
No way, really?
Yeah, so I have this fire starter bundle behind me.
What? Are you serious?
I'm dead serious.
No way.
Yeah, I don't remember if you were handing them out or why they were
I
there.
don't think so.
But
I don't remember handing out fire starters.
I took one and I've kept it. And,
cool. Yeah, he loved those. I have a few of them around the house.
Yeah.
Still too, so.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Well, I hope I didn't just steal one from you.
Yeah.
I don't know how I ended up with that.
Maybe I did give it to you. I don't know. But
Yeah.
either way, I'm glad you have it. I'm very glad you have it.
Yeah, that's very special. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah. So what I wanted to ask you is, what is on your heart? What are you up to these days? What's kind of behind what you're sharing with the world right now with your own business? And I see you putting yourself out there on social media. So what is on your heart? What do you want to share with people listening?
Yeah. Thank you for the invitation. I think maybe I'll just start by telling a little bit about kind of the story of my journey, and then that will kind of lead me into what I think about and where my focus is today. So as I mentioned, I went to work for that program in Hawaii, and really that was just about being outside. I didn't even know what therapy was. It was just so ignorant in that realm. And stepping into that program was kind of the first time that I was introduced to the, quote unquote therapeutic world. And that whole experience, I mean, while yes, you're working with adolescents, but really it's a process within a process, and everything happening through and with the adolescence is just a reflection of what's happening in the guide's internal world. And I think that's what separates, a good guide from a great guide, from somebody who can like really thrive in that environment, is like the willingness to allow all of that to just be a reflection of, again, your inner world. And I couldn't have articulated that back then, but I could sense that something really important was happening for me in my own psychospiritual development. And I use that word really intentionally. I don't I don't think psychology, as much as we'd like to keep psychology separate from spirituality, I don't think a process can. Um, I think a process is severely lacking if it doesn't include conversation around spiritual development, which is funny too, because when you're going through school and you're getting kind of the education around being a therapist, I guess depending on where you're at, they might directly tell you, don't wade into that realm, or they'll indirectly talk about how that's not our job. We shouldn't be talking about those kinds of things. Thankfully, I think the industry is changing generally. And maybe those are circles and bubbles that I'm in, but I am optimistic about people relating to therapy as a psycho-spiritual process. That was a little bit of a tangent, but so anyway, I started working in these therapy programs, and I realized pretty quickly that the therapeutic part is what really drew me. And again, I think it drew me because I knew that I wanted to develop as a person. It wasn't about like, oh, I'm going to learn these skills to help these people develop. It was like, I want to learn that for me. And I've said that along the way many times, like there's a funny thing that happens when you become a therapist. It's like almost this like pseudo, like, thank you for your service kind of energy that people give you, which I think is funny. Like I appreciate that people appreciate mental health and wanting to work and help people. But I always say, like, this is more for me than it is for anybody else. Like, this is like the kind of selfish, altruistic pursuit of my own personal development. And so as the years went on, I just got deeper and deeper, and I went back into school. I got my degree, and then I started working in all these various settings, which led me to ultimately starting my own practice. And we're about 3 years into the practice, but 2 years into it being more than just me. Like I have a couple of people who work within the practice now. And somewhere along the lines, I realized that, kind of in line with what I was saying about the psycho-spiritual process, like I was far more interested in consciousness than anything else. And so everything was just kind of a front of like pulling me down this road to find a way where I could explore consciousness and get paid for it, essentially. But again, that was very unconscious. I couldn't have told you when I set out, like, this is what I'm doing and this is why I'm going to do it. It's all just kind of unfolded. And as part of that unfolding, it's been me really reconciling how disconnected I was and still am in some respects from my body. And I can go into reasons why that is if it's interesting, but I can kind of give a brief summary of, like, I was raised in a very high demand religion and religious setting. And I think a lot of the messages I received growing up and in my developmental years, it basically taught me that the body was bad, the body was not to be listened to, and the body was an instrument of shame. And as I've done my work, I've realized that I spent like a decade and a half just so immersed in shame that I couldn't connect to my body, because being embodied was such a uncomfortable experience. And so my path has led me to this just kind of obsession with connecting to my body. And that's both in like again, a quote unquote therapeutic setting, as well as just like exercise. Like I've changed the way that I exercise for it to be an embodied, intentional process. And I found that every time I invest into being embodied, my life improves exponentially. And so, like, in this kind of positive feedback loop where the deeper I go with this focus and this intention, the richer life gets. And as you're probably well aware, like, I'm not saying anything new here. People have said this forever and all time. But this is the way that message has reached me, and this is the way that I'm starting to live into it, and I'm just thrilled to be on this journey. Like I don't need it to hurry. I don't need it to end. I expect it to be a lifelong process, and that's super exciting to me.
I like hearing you say that I'm doing this for me. Like, this is, yeah, how you started off with, like, this is something I'm a way to explore myself while getting paid for it. And I haven't heard someone say that, and so I just really appreciate it. And I also, I've never heard the term psychospiritual. I don't think I've really heard that being used much. And you were saying that you don't use it lightly.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I just don't actually really hear that word, those two words together being used very often. And then I'm curious to hear, like, what does it even mean to be embodied?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. So I'll give you a little bit of the kind of clinical language around it because it's been really helpful for me to reconnect through that lens. So I mentioned this idea of being so filled with shame I couldn't be in my body. And a mammalian nervous system, so a nervous system in mammals, has a mechanism inside of it to dissociate. And it's an incredibly adaptive response. We're supposed to dissociate. There are times where fully disconnecting from the body is a really adaptive strategy for survival. The problem arises when we live in a state of chronic dissociation. So when our nervous system is in a forever state of fight, flight, or freeze, or it's just being like hyper stimulated. And I lived in that state of chronic dissociation for like probably 10 years, if not longer. And there's also a saying when we're working with dissociation that the last person to know they're dissociated is the one who's dissociated. And that was 100% true for me. I had no idea how numb I was, how disconnected I was. 'Cause it's almost like the fish in water. You know that story from David Foster Wallace? Mm-hmm. That's like the fish walks out, swims by and says, "How's the water?" And the other fish says, "What the hell's water?" Because they've been in it so long, they have no idea. So that's the same experience, or the experience that I had. So when I started learning about dissociation and the difficulty of working with dissociation clinically, so many dots connected for me. It was like, oh, this is exactly what has been happening to me. And so I started doing work that was all about kind of resolving dissociation and bringing you back into the body, which you can't necessarily talk your way through dissociation. This is a big shortcoming of talk therapy. You have to get the body connected and involved in the experience. And there's a million different modalities, a million different interventions of how to do that. And some of them work for some people and they don't for others. The intervention that I came across was actually through a training experience to use ketamine or cannabis as a psychedelic agent to kind of help bring a person back into their body. I'm more than happy to talk about that if that's interesting, but I'll pause there for a second and just, this is a roundabout answer to say, what does it mean to be embodied? Returning back to kind of the language of the nervous system, it means to have a nervous system that is not in a dissociated state and not chronically hyperactivated in a fight, flight, or freeze state.
So the question in my head right now that's coming to my mind, if you're the last one in the room to know you're dissociated, how do you know if you're dissociated?
Yeah, really good question. Symptoms, if we're just talking about symptoms, feeling of floatiness, feeling disconnected, life is empty. It feels like I'm watching my life. It feels like I'm on the sidelines and everyone's just living, but I'm just here. It might be chronic use of, for me, it was marijuana. Like I was just high all the time and just thought that that was like a normal, it was like, oh, I just like this. It just enhances my life. It makes it more fun for me to hike or whatever. But it was just to keep me completely numb and disconnected, lack of feeling. And, there might be some people who are listening to this who are they're like, oh, I experienced that for sure. And I guess I just want to say that it's not an all or nothing experience. You might have moments where you're feeling really connected and present and joyful, and then they're kind of fleeting, and then you go back to kind of this numb place where you feel like someone's living your life for you, or you're not there. But those are some ways that it commonly shows up for people. I guess I'll add one more thing. In a talk therapy session, often what happens is you're in there and you're having a talk therapy session, and it's a safe environment. The person feels grounded, they feel connected. We're building a ton of insight, and then they leave and they go back to normal life, and within 1 to 2 hours they can't remember anything that we talked about. All the insight's gone. It's like, what was that? That felt so magical, but I can't remember any of it. And that's a classic sign that they're in some form of a dissociated state in those sessions.
Wow. And so then now you mentioned ketamine and cannabis, which I do think would be interesting to go into a little.
Yeah.
Where you now do work that helps yourself and people feel more embodied, and by not just talk therapy, because talk therapy is limiting in its own ways. So what exactly do you do then?
Yeah. So the modality that I'm talking about and that was really helpful for me is called Psychedelic Somatic Interactional Psychotherapy, which is not that important, but I do just want to give the attribution to them. PSIP, PSIP for short. So the premise of PSIP is, and it doesn't start using ketamine or cannabis, that's down the line. There's a lot of preparatory work to get ready to go there. Basically, those medicines kind of increase the speed and the intensity of the processing session, but you start processing before that. And the way that you facilitate that is you're using a process called selective inhibition, and you're intentionally trying to inhibit and stop a person, their coping mechanisms. And so there's 4 primary channels of coping. There's relational, emotional, physical, and then mental. And so as a facilitator, you're trying to, I envision it as like bumpers on a bowling alley. You're trying to like put up these bumpers and help the client attune to all of the ways that they're coping to avoid what's happening inside of their body. And when you get into it, you find that the ways that people cope, it's infinite, and some of it's very overt, and some of it is so subtle, it just blows your mind. And so when you help them really limit these coping mechanisms, what you start to see is that there's tons of sensation in the body. And when you stay with those sensations, they grow and they develop, and they can even move into autonomic release, which can look like really intense emotions. It can look like tremoring. It can look like shaking. It can look like all kinds of different physical movement that is quite jarring for people who aren't used to that type of experience. But it's also very normal for, again, a mammalian nervous system to cope and regulate. And so through that process, and then when you add in ketamine or cannabis, again, it just kind of it speeds up the intensity and I guess it speeds it up and makes it a little bit more intense. One more thing I'll say about that is you see in these sessions that a person will begin to feel something very intensely in their body, and then they'll go into dissociation. And you're really attuning to dissociation. You're not even trying to get them out of it. You're just asking them to notice, what is that like? And the craziest thing is that when you attune and you pay very close attention to dissociation, you find that there's a whole world of dissociation. And it's a very nuanced experience. And so when you have the capacity to acknowledge it in one of these PSIP sessions, you then go into the rest of your life and you're like, oh, I'm in that state again. This is that place. Can I return to my body? Can I find something in my body? And it ends up, for me, again, it gave me so much more understanding of what was going on inside of me and in my nervous system, and so much more capacity to return and be more embodied. But it's practice, it takes constant attention.
Wow. I honestly, one thing I'm thinking when I'm hearing this, I'm trying to see if I relate in some way, because it actually is quite foreign to me, because I'm someone that lives in a body that feels everything. Like, I'm like, am I too embodied? Like, I just feel like I'm a big feeler, and I feel my stuff, I feel other people's stuff. And so I'm trying to picture, I'm sure I can relate in some way, or maybe there's something I unconsciously dissociate, or, so I'm kind of curious of like the journey of how people find you and kind of what the whole process is. Like, is it someone that's like, okay, I've been kind of disembodied. Here's this person that knows how to work through that. You said there's preparatory work. I'm kind of curious of like what gets prepared to then be able to go into that release. Because I did see I think I've seen 2 videos on your Instagram that you vulnerably have posted of you having, I believe, some kind of somatic release, and I was kind of like a little shocking to watch. I don't know if I have seen that before, and so it's definitely new to me. Like, I'm coming from a place of this being very new, listening to what you're talking about. And so if there's, I guess, I'm just kind of curious of the journey, of how someone begins doing this, what the preparation is, and to lead them to that point of holding space for releasing out the body, and then when and how assisted like ketamine and cannabis looks into that too. That's kind of a big question.
No, totally though. It's a good question. It is kind of shocking to your point, and I've had those videos for over a year now, and I mean, obviously when it happened, I was not ready to share it all, but as time has gone on, I've realized that it might be helpful. And I intend to continue sharing, just to kind of show people. But I'm doing it with a little bit of hesitation, because I also don't want to just turn people completely off of like, oh my gosh, like, what is this crazy guy doing? But to answer your question of the journey, it's funny. I find that most of my clients, they're not coming to me knowing that this is the type of work that they want to do. But as time goes on and as we work together, and I just even begin to ask questions about their body and what they're feeling and what they're experiencing, and they begin to realize that there's kind of this whole absent part of them, it kind of wakes them up to like, wait, what? I've never even thought about this. Like one of my favorite questions to ask in early sessions is like, what is your relationship like with your body? And I can't tell you how often people are like, what do you mean? What do you mean a relationship with my body? Like, they don't even know. I also think that's very indicative of where I live. That's the Salt Lake Valley. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I've heard from other therapists who move here from other places that this is a particularly disembodied population.
Wow.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that has to do with the high demand religion stuff I was talking about before. So that's a really interesting, like, kind of cultural piece for my location. So a lot of people, they don't even know that that's a part of their life that's missing. And when I start to ask them about it, it kind of opens their eyes to like, oh, what? Okay. And then when we start talking about symptoms, especially like physical symptoms, as signals, or if this was telling you something about your body or your way of life, what is that? What would that be? And that's a mind-blowing realization for a lot of the people that I work with. So usually it starts really subtle. They're not coming and saying, I'm chronically dissociated, I need this. Occasionally I'll get a person who has usually what we would call it is complex PTSD. And those are usually people who have been in a lot of therapy for many, many years, and nothing is really changing for them. And the primary reason for that, again, is the difficulty in working with the dissociation. So occasionally I get that type of person. And I anticipate I'm going to start getting a lot more as I put this work out there kind of front and center. So we'll see how that plays out. And then in terms of the question about preparation, so I mean, a couple of things that you're really trying to establish is, number one, safety and consent. You do these activities around saying no. And essentially you're trying to, number one, you're trying to assess a person's nervous system reaction to saying no. A lot of people have a really hard time saying no, especially to somebody who's in kind of perceived authority. So they're here working with me as a therapist. I'm in the authority position. They have to know that they can say no. And so depending on their capacity, that might be a couple of sessions of doing like almost like guided imagery of like saying no to different people in their life and watching what happens inside, how much that brings up in them, and then moving into like saying no to me. And then we'll do other work. We'll do kind of these processing sessions that don't have medicine so that it's a little bit easier. Again, because like when you add in the medicine, it goes really fast. You have a little bit less control. So we do a lot of sessions without the medicine so that there's kind of like a really easy exit ramp, and so that they can begin to feel what it's like to let these sensations bubble up through their body, because at times it's really uncomfortable. I mean, you can imagine they've constructed an entire life around not feeling it. And now we're saying, okay, let's feel it.
Yeah, I'm picturing like I'm feeling like intense. I'm like, the word that's in my mind is like, holy crap, this is a big space to hold.
It is intense. It's super intense. And that's what I'm saying. Like, it's not for everybody. There's work to do to get there. And I mean, it even goes to another level, which I haven't facilitated yet. I'm not there in my process or with my clients, but you do the session, but you do it eye gazing with the therapist. And Whoa. The whole point of that, typically you're doing it blind with a eye shade on. You're not seeing. When you go into the eye gazing, you tap into this whole other channel of transference and countertransference, and you get into these like deeply held implicit and unconscious beliefs about relationship. And as a therapist, you're kind of inviting all of the projection about it. And so it becomes a lot to hold, and you have to realize like all this projection onto me, it has nothing to do with me. It's what's like deep in this person's consciousness, and it's like how they're relating to the world, really. So people with complex developmental attachment trauma, people aren't safe. The people have not been safe for them. So when you go into an eye gazing session, all of that lack of safety comes out, and then you have it there in the room, and you're working through it through their body. And it's quite intense work. It is.
Something that you said intrigued me personally there, of when people are projecting and you as the therapist, you're like, this is not mine. Mm-hmm. Is that enough for you to just say in your head or whatever you do, like, this is not mine? Like, how do you, because that's something, I live in a world where, yeah, I'm just very sensitive and I take on people's things. And that's something I'm working on, is dealing with people's projections. And now I'm hearing that you're like in a room deeply, deeply, deeply working with someone, and yeah, all facets of them. And so I'm kind of curious of what do you do to not take that on? Totally.
Yeah. So again, in the context of PSIP, I have not done these sessions, so I haven't tapped into that level of projection. But it still happens in other sessions for sure. Is it enough to just say that? No. Like, that's kind of like the equivalent, of like talk therapy versus being embodied. Like, I think ultimately, I mean, I'm just going to stick with the theme here, but I think it's true. Like, everything comes down to a regulated nervous system. If I am regulated and my internal state is one of peace, then that doesn't affect me. If I'm dysregulated and I'm tired, or I've had an argument and I'm carrying that into the session, and then that projection, that transference comes onto me, then it's like, oh, now my body is looking for every reason to like validate how uncomfortable this is. And then I get carried away by whatever that transference was, or the fear from that. So it just requires me to be very attuned to what's happening inside of me.
What does that look like? Like, how do you attune to what's happening inside of you if you're dysregulated?
Yeah. Well, the one of the quickest ways, if I'm at like a level of stress and anxiety, is like I'll clench my jaw. So there's just a physical manifestation of like, oh, I'm clenching my jaw. My body is wired tight right now. What is going on? And then I can kind of feel into that and see like, oh yeah, okay, I'm really tight here. I'm tight here. And Abby, again, like 2 years ago, I could not do any of this.
Wow.
When they were telling me in graduate school, like, feel into the body, I literally asked, like, what is everyone talking about? Like, I don't feel anything. So tapping into the jaw, I mean, more of like tapping into physical sensations. Other things that I notice is like, am I present? Like, what is going on in my mind? Am I thinking about what happened before? Am I thinking about what's going to happen in the future? Is it just kind of a wheel in there? And am I really having a hard time being present? Those are kind of the biggest ones. And I'd honestly say the feeling of being not present is like a huge one for me. That really indicates that like something inside of me is hyperactive.
The feeling of not being present?
Yeah, lack of presence.
If you're not present, how do you then know? How do you all of a sudden become present that you're not present?
Yeah, exactly. That's a really good question. It's like, oh my gosh, that person was just talking to me for a minute and I didn't hear anything that they said. Where was I? Oh, okay, I'm not here. And you're totally right, though. I mean, it takes, again, I've said this before, but it takes attention and practice. And this is like one of those things that it's like the hardest part of my job. Like, I can't do this for my clients. Like, you need to be thinking about it all the time if you want it to change. That sounds a little extreme, but I think that's
it's
true.
It's a constant practice.
It's a constant practice.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Yeah. So then have you administered ketamine or cannabis in a session?
Yes. Yeah. I've done a lot of that. And I've done a lot of the PSIP processing sessions, and I've seen really amazing things. Most people kind of report the same thing that I'm reporting, is like, oh my gosh, I'm now aware of like all of this inner world that's happening all the time that I'm never paying attention to. I'm never noticing it happen. And it's because you're taking such like a fine tooth comb or just this magnifying glass to these subtle and small sensations in your body, and watching how they like develop and increase, and they hold emotion and they hold memories. And then you just begin to see like, oh my gosh, all of this is in there and it's affecting my life. It's like the way that they describe it in the training is like, it's like a film negative over your eyes. And you're like looking through this film negative of like unconscious and repressed material that's coming out. And you might not even notice that it's coming out because it's just such the norm.
Wow. So I'm trying to picture this. And are you blindfolded?
Yeah, I usually wear eye shades. Yeah.
And you're seeing like images of unconscious parts that have been stored in your body?
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes you go into this kind of mental place, and the trick that you're trying to find there is like, is this a mental place of images that are totally disconnected from any type of feeling? Okay, then we're in kind of a dissociated place. is this a mental place that's also very connected to a physical sensation in your body? Okay, we're embodied and we're going to let that process continue. That's part of the challenge as the facilitators. You're trying to understand, okay, like, where are we right now? Is this like, are they turning over images in their mind because it's allowing them to disconnect from their body or not? And that's what I was saying about like inhibiting all of these coping mechanisms. You're trying to attune to that and then bring them back to the body. And I mean, we're talking a lot about PSIP, which is great. If it's helpful, I can send you, and maybe you would put it in the link, or I don't know how you'd want to do it, but like there's a lot of videos put out by the PSIP people from the facilitators and the trainers that show exactly what a process looks like the full thing. So I don't know if that would be interesting for people or for you, but
yeah, we can put a link in the show notes for sure.
Yeah.
If people want to watch more about it.
Yeah.
So then as the therapist, when you're facilitating this and they're going through this, you're asking questions and they're responding, or what does that look like?
Yeah, so it might be like, oh, I feel this little tightness in my arm. And it might say, okay, let's stay with that. Let's watch that. Tell me if it changes or develops in any way, and let's see what happens. And then they might say, okay, I lost contact with that. Okay, what's here now? Well, I'm just keep thinking of this image of like a dog. And then I might ask like, okay, well, is there any feeling associated with that dog? Does that bring up any kind of feeling in your body? They might say yes, they might say no. And we're just kind of continuing to watch it. And then if something happens in the body and it really increases and there's a lot of activation, maybe even to the point where like their body begins to tremor, very often after that, they go into a dissociated place because their body's kind of going into a little bit of overwhelm. And then they'll be like, oh, I'm floaty now. I'm super floaty. And we'll just say, okay, great. And then a telltale sign is like, does it feel good to be in that place, or how does that feel? And they'll be like, oh, it feels awesome. Because that dissociated place is like safe. I'm disconnected from everything. It's great. But I said this earlier, there's a nuance to it, and I'll never forget this example. So in the training, when I was going through my session, I was like, oh, I'm floaty. And Saj, the facilitator, was like, okay, are you floaty like in air, or are you like floaty in water? And I'm like thinking about it, I'm like, I'm totally in water. And it's crazy because it's like, oh, there's a nuanced experience to this. It's not just one thing. And so I'm like, oh, I'm floaty in water. And he's like, okay, are you like just like totally in the water, or are you like a droplet of water like floating on the surface? I'm like,
wow.
Oh no, I'm like totally the water. He's like, okay, great, just be the water. You know? But it brings so much attention to like, whoa, this is an experience I can attune to, and it's happening, and I'm not disconnected from it. And then you sit in the dissociation, and then all of a sudden, kind of the dream of the floaty, comfy place ends, and then there's a sensation in the body that's just asking for your attention, and then you go back into the body, and then usually you kind of start another wave where the body acts up, and you're kind of doing this dance between activation, dissociation, activation, until it all kind of resolves in usually a pretty intense wave of autonomic release.
Wow. So then when someone goes through this whole journey with you, or the journey you've gone on in your own personal life, how do you, gosh, in my mind, I'm just like, that's a big thing to integrate. Like if you have this big experience with the therapist and then you leave the office, kind of what is that experience like of going through this big release or visualization or whatever it is you go through, and then to step out into the world? Like what are maybe common feelings or experiences, or what do you do with that?
Yeah. Well, you tap into the sensational experience of living. You begin to notice that your life is not like a television screen playing out in your mind. It's a felt sense experience moment to moment. And so let's say in the most extreme case, you're a person with the complex PTSD that I talked about, where like people from the perspective of your nervous system are just generally totally unsafe. For that person, you begin to see that their nervous system, because it's gone to the place where it's holding all of the fear and terror around being in relationship and let some of that out, it's now a little bit easier to be around people. It's a little bit easier to trust. It's a little bit easier to notice when you're being fully hijacked and dysregulated by your nervous system's deeply held fear that people are unsafe. That's like a general thing, but I've heard from people, and one of my very good friends who's also a therapist who went through the training, she reports that she fully kind of reversed her insecure attachment through this work. And that's like a lofty claim, and I want to put a caveat in there that took her like years of work, but she now reports that like she can be in a relationship and not do the endless push-pull thing that she had done her whole life. And she's in her 50s now. And so that was like decades of patterns to undo. For people who maybe aren't trying to fully kind of reverse and rewire the way that their nervous system relates to people, you might just have a little bit more capacity, again, to be present to the sensational experience. Like one that I had was like the experience of beauty. Like I was walking in these streets around my office and I came across these flowers, and I looked at the flowers and I could feel how beautiful they were. It wasn't like the idea, this is a beautiful flower because of the purple and the white and the way that it sits here, you know, like this really intellectual description of beauty. It was like a felt sense experience. And that's what I mean when I say like the sensational experience of living. That's a good experience, you know, or a comfortable experience. And yeah, that's that's generally what happens.
There's a shift. It sounds like all of a sudden there's a shift. It's like kind of subtle, yet at the same time it sounds really profound to all of a sudden switch from just intellectualizing something, but then all of a sudden you realize, whoa, I feel the beauty rather than just thinking about it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. And that's been my experience. The other thing that it's done for me, the simplest way that I would say it is it's just increased my ability to give and receive love, because I can feel it. It's not just an idea anymore. It's a feeling.
Talk more about that.
Yeah, totally. Well, I would say that the only goal of therapy at the root of every single process is to increase a person's capacity to give and receive love. And I've recently gotten more comfortable just saying that. I didn't want to say that for a while, you know, because of all my own biases and fears. But if you think about it, like the only thing, like trauma is just a blockage of love. Whether it's something that happened to you, whether it's something that you saw, whatever it is going on, it's limiting your ability to either love yourself or love others and to receive other people's love or to receive love for yourself. And I think we do people a disservice by not just naming that. It's like it's the only thing that's real, and I can cloak it in as many diagnoses and as many fancy terms or modalities as I want, but ultimately I just want a person to walk out of my office better equipped to give and receive love. And that's been my process too, of like, again, just like, I don't know how to explain this one. There's this activity that I do in this group that I facilitate, and it involves this kind of somatic, almost dancing exercise with two other people. I've done the exercise a million times. When I did it after going through PSIP, I felt it for the first time. And I felt just like this beautiful experience of my two partners guiding me, loving me. I could feel the emotion flowing for like the first time ever. And it was just so profound. To your point, it's subtle, but profound. And since then, I just continue to notice how I have so much more capacity to give and receive love. So not to be repetitive, but I think that's what it comes down to.
I just feel good hearing you say that. So yeah, you can repeat it as many times as you want. Yeah.
Yeah. Great.
I love that. That's been a huge message in my life this last year of what humans do to block themselves off from what we deeply desire the most, which is love.
100%.
And yeah, that's been a big insight for me this last year. Like people do some crazy shit to avoid, block off, like all the things we do or how we push it away when it's what we so crave and desire the most.
Yes.
Is that love.
Yeah, and that's kind of analogous in some ways to the PSIP process where what we're saying is like the thing that your body and nervous system most wants is to be connected and attuned. And we do some crazy shit to not be in our bodies and therefore to not be able to feel and experience love. I think you're dead on. And it's quite crazy when you start viewing the world through that lens. It's like, what the hell is going on here?
And you're married, right?
Yeah.
How have you seen that manifest in your intimate relationship, if you're open to sharing that?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's a lot of the similar things. It's like love moves from this kind of pragmatic intellectual exercise to a deeply felt sense experience. And I mean, I don't want to be like too dramatic. It wasn't like I just only intellectually loved my wife. I knew that I loved her, and I knew that there was like a deep, meaningful partnership here. But it's definitely moved on into a deeper, I'll just keep saying like more felt sense experience. And part of the difficulty here as well is like when we're moving into the land of the body and sensation, we're moving into a world beyond language, which so it inherently becomes kind of limited and difficult to talk about. Because it's not a language place. It's a feeling place.
I was even wondering that too. I'm like, I feel like I'm trying to over intellectualize, like trying to put this into a linear explanation, but it's, it's just so much more than that.
Yeah,
I definitely feel that it's hard to describe. Totally.
And it's helpful to try and talk about it, to orient people to it, but ultimately it's like you have to go there to know it.
Just a brief pause here. If you're enjoying this episode so far with Christian and I, if you can just take a moment right now to hit the 5-star rating on whatever platform you're enjoying the Abby Lee Wellness Podcast on. So you can grab your device, either scroll down on Apple Podcasts and hit the 5 stars, or if you're on Spotify on your phone, you have to go to the top. And if you look over where it says follow, and then just to the right, there's these 3 dots that are there. You can click on those and then you hit rate show and bam, you're there. And this helps the podcast reach more people and hopefully make a positive impact on people's lives. So what else you got going on? What else do you want to share with the world?
I was just thinking this when we were talking about kind of the lengths that we go to avoid love. In one of my medicine journeys last year, I kind of had this, what just felt like such a profound truth kind of beamed into me that was like, the only reason that we're here on earth is because our consciousness wanted a body. Like, that's it. There's something about the experience of having a body that is like the most coveted experience in the cosmos, in the universe. And so because the body is the most like intricate feeling instrument you could ever imagine. And I don't even think we use like we barely use any of it. And so then it just became like, as this journey developed, it became so obvious and kind of painfully funny to me that like we came here to have a body. We came here to feel. And then we start to feel and we're like, oh my God, this sucks. I hate feeling. And so then we start drinking and doing drugs and like getting uber medicated and like doing everything possible to feel less, when like that was the only reason we came here. And so it's like, if you're in a position where your life is about feeling less, like you forgot the game. Like you totally forgot why you're here. And that just like blew my mind, and I love thinking about it that way. And it makes it so much more exciting to just embrace, again, the sensational experience of living, because that's why I'm freaking here. That's it.
I love that. Can you paint the picture? Like, I want to be there when you had this profound insight. Like, what medicine were you working with? Where were you? What was like the ambiance that brought you to receiving that message?
Yeah, good question.
Bring me there.
It was ayahuasca, and it was a place that I've told you about. It's a place I go to regularly in Colorado, and it's a very, very well run place. They do ceremony they have for decades, and so it's a very tight medicine container. There's a person facilitating, singing Icaros, like the traditional prayer songs. Just a really connected and really safe container to go deep into these medicines. And I think this was the first night of 3. And I actually had done a PSIP session a couple days before I went to sit with ayahuasca. And part of that was wondering if I moved some of this energy out of my nervous system, would the ayahuasca medicine be a deeper experience? And I guess deeper is kind of an arbitrary word. What I would say is like a more embodied experience. And I think it was. I've only done it once, so it's still like kind of very anecdotal. I've only done the PSIP preparation once, so it's kind of anecdotal, but I can say just generally my medicine work post PSIP has been way more about my body than my mind, which I have something to say about that in a minute. So yeah, night 1, and I had just been spending so much time thinking about my body. And when I went into the medicine, my body got just worked. Like, I frequently have what I can only describe as like birth experiences, but it's me giving birth.
Whoa.
Yeah. And I don't know how to really, I've obviously never given birth, at least not in this lifetime and in this body. But it ends up being like these grueling hours of like labor and a continual kind of thought and reminder that I have to deliver this new kind of being. And this has happened like 3 times now. And it always culminates in the purge. And I always feel profound relief that I've carried another child to term, essentially. But this one actually, okay, I mean, you asked for it, so
yeah, I'm
going to go there. Yeah, okay.
Go there.
This one was like particularly grueling because it felt like hours and hours of carrying this baby, and then I would go into these other realms, and ayahuasca, she would remind me, she kept saying, don't forget you have an appointment to deliver this baby. And as the night went on, all of a sudden I started getting these really intense images and message that like, this is going to be a stillbirth. And it got, it was just so heavy. It was like, because it felt like I'd carried this baby for a lifetime. And I started seeing all these other stillbirths, and I started seeing children being born with just like horrible deformities, and you just see everything that you could imagine. And it was like, oh my God, like I did all that and the baby's gonna die. And I went through the familiar purge, and I kind of lost contact with, whether it was a baby or whether it wasn't. It just became a release. And then on the other side of the journey, as I was still in the medicine, but much less deep, and reflecting on what had just happened, that's when kind of this download of like, you came here to experience that. And yes, it's painful, and yes, it's uncomfortable, but the only way you can experience that is with a body. And that's what you wanted, and that's why you're here. And if you can feel that, you can feel the opposite, which is joy and love and peace and abundance. And you're just going to have both. That's what you signed up for. And that felt very liberating in that moment after hours of grueling labor.
Were you feeling that labor in your body?
Yes. Like it's happy. Like, I don't want to be like too presumptive here, but I think I know what it's like to have a baby.
Yeah.
It's like,
I'll let you have that as a woman. I'll say, yeah, you can say that.
it is so physical. And what happened, and this has happened twice now, a week before I go out, I get this really intense pain in my hips and my lower back and my pelvis.
Whoa.
And when that happened the first time, and I had this birth experience, and I've had it 3 times now. When I had it the first time and I got deep in the medicine, she was like, all that pain you've been feeling is because I've been preparing you to give birth tonight.
Whoa.
And that was the first time. And that time it was like, you're going to give birth to yourself, and it's going to take a while, and you've been carrying it for a bit. And so we're going to work it out.
You're going to give birth to yourself?
To me, to like the new version of me that was going to move forward into the world after that ceremony.
Wow.
Yeah. And so then when it's happened a couple other times, I've been like, dude, what the hell? Like, I already gave birth to myself. Why am I still doing this?
Did you get an answer?
No. It's just been this kind of like grueling experience of having a body, And I think that's just really indicative of my work right now. Like you said, like you've lived an embodied and connected life, I think I'm playing a little bit of catch up. And so my experiences, they've become so much about that.
Wow. So I've heard people say this with ayahuasca, like she told me this. Is it a voice that comes to you, or like what is that experience? This is just my own personal curiosity, because when I've drank ayahuasca, I don't know if I have that relationship where I hear she hasn't told me something. So when people say like is it a voice that you hear, or what is that like?
People have asked that before. It's less of like an audible voice and more of just kind of like an internal conversation. I've seen her like physically, I guess, or like in my mind's eye as like a couple of different things. A very large freaky spider was one of them. Just kind of this like forest nymph type thing, but it feels it's not like a hallucination I'm looking into the room and seeing. It's more like in my mind's eye and in my heart, as well as kind of the conversation. It's not like an audible thing, at least for me.
I feel like did you recently sit with ayahuasca?
I did in early August, actually. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that was a birthing experience?
That was not, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, that was not. I was gonna say thankfully, but I don't know. Maybe not. Like, because it's the other side of it is just so powerful. But what I was gonna say before, one thing that I've realized as I've again done this PSIP work, but also just sat more and more with psychedelic medicine is like, I think psychedelics are their body medicines. They're somatic medicine. And we have a weird relationship where like, I mean, even in like pop culture, we'll talk about like the hallucination, or like we talk so much about like seeing things. And I almost think that that's even a symptom of like dissociation or a dissociated culture. And psychedelics are actually there can be visuals for sure. I mean, and that is a common thing, but they're much more somatic, internal, body-based medicines than we give them credit for. And again, that's kind of been my experience has been as I've worked on my nervous system. Whenever I go into a psychedelic place, it's like so in my body in a way that it never was before. And I've seen that in my clients as well. So that's kind of PSIP will kind of posit that. But that's kind of just been my working perspective and hypothesis as well. And I think it's true, but time will tell.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up because there's kind of this thing of like chasing the hallucination.
Right.
And I actually, my first couple times, I didn't even see anything. It was actually very intellectual. I was able to like solve all my life problems and just sitting there in the dark.
Yeah.
But there's also something coming when you're describing this too. I'm really just hearing too like intentional living, because you said that you intentionally did a PSIP session before you then sat with ayahuasca in hopes of the ayahuasca medicine maybe going deeper or allowing you to be more embodied.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of humans out there that don't do this stuff,
Totally.
And as I'm hearing you talk about all your experiences and just you do so much work. You're really on this path of being more embodied. And what keeps you on this path? Because I'm thinking too to someone who might listen and be, or like when I've talked about my ayahuasca experiences, like I'm just so in it sometimes. In Montana, I think it's a little more normal. Like so many of my friends are healers and massage therapists and yogis. And, it's just everyday talk about like the herbs and the nature, like a lot of people around here, I think it's just a little more normal. And then all of a sudden I travel somewhere else. It was actually in Utah, but I was talking to someone, a friend, and about my ayahuasca experience. And, I was just like, it was just this big, beautiful, profound experience. And then, I shared this story. And then at the end, she goes, "You want to do that?" And it made me realize, to me, it's this big, beautiful, profound thing. But to someone else who's listening to it, they're like, what the fuck? Like, who would sign up for that? You're puking, you're releasing things in your body, you're feeling stuff, you're crying, you're like, why you paid money for that? So so what keeps you on this path that you're on?
Yeah, totally. It kind of goes back to my answer earlier, my realization that like I'm actually just mostly interested in consciousness, and I'm interested in my own consciousness. And I don't think that that's a selfish endeavor or pursuit, because again, it's all in the name of being better capable and equipped to give and receive love. And if I can go into these places and show up with love for myself and the people around me, and I can go to these really dark, scary parts of my consciousness and psyche and learn to love those, then it's only going to be easier to do that for the world around me. And I have no illusions or like even desires to be like, I want to change the world, like I think that's great. I mean, if that's how people are living their life, that's awesome. But I think really like I only have control of like the 100 people in my orbit, that like I see regularly through friends and family and clients and whatever. And like, if I can just show up as the most present, most loving, most capable from a self-regulation perspective, then I think that will change the world. Like and it will be small and it will be subtle, but it will be enough. And right now that like this feels like the avenue for me to just keep doing that. I mean, let's check in like 5 or 10 years. Maybe I'm not working with or touching psychedelics in any way. I don't know. But right now, that's the path, and I'm super invested in it.
I appreciate that. I'm definitely I'm like, I want to change the world. And which is a big part of having the podcast, where I feel like it's just, I've been doing so much one-on-one work over the last 10 years or so. And now I totally agree with you of the impact that we make by just showing up fully embodied in love. That is a huge part. I would actually say that is exactly what I'm like. That's my mission right now. Every day is to, I don't know if I've quite said that out loud, to no matter where I am in like a stressful work environment or with talking with someone or my neighbor or with myself, to really exude that love outwardly, because I give so much of it to myself. And then also wanting it to be on a larger scale where people can see that there are humans like us kind of behind the scenes that are doing all of this work, and it makes a huge impact. And I think there's a lot of people out there right now that are really waking up to this way of living, especially after the times of COVID. And I really do feel a shift in humanity, and people are looking at alternative. There's just a lot more research, or people researching on their own, of alternative medicines and taking care of themselves. And I just appreciate the work that you're doing and the impact that it makes in every interaction that we have when we're fully embodied in that love, to be able to give and receive love.
Yeah. And I would echo you on that. I see that in my community and my clients and people, for as bad as people like to say things are, or as like the media or the world would portray to you, like, there is a lot of horrible things going on. And I'm also very optimistic. I think we're going through a breaking so that we can do kind of a reforming. And the more people who are conscious and again regulated and loving, the better it will be.
Yes, that is what I'm here for.
Yeah.
I would say that's at the root of my podcast, and the messages and the people I want to connect with are providing hope. And because I've just been hearing a lot of negativity too, and I take those messages and I hear them, and I genuinely feel inside that we do have the power to create the world that we want for ourselves. And I believe there's enough of us that are kind of that believe in that and are going after it. And I just believe those messages need to be shared more.
Yeah, I 100% agree. We need more optimism. There's so much fear, which again, I mean, it's just the opposite of love. And so like, if your body is dysregulated and incapable of being present, then it's filled with fear. And if it's filled with fear, you're not going to spread love. And if you're not going to spread love, then you're part of the problem.
Yeah, fear. So much fear.
So much.
And what do you... Oh man, because I hear the fear, I hear the lots of fear, and I see people when they're in this really the depths of the fear, and I hold space for it and I listen to it, and sometimes I don't know what I'm supposed to do with it because it does. All of a sudden, I can feel it in my body. I feel their fear in my body, and now all of a sudden, I'm like, shit, should I be scared about, like, I wasn't even scared about this thing 3 minutes, I was great 3 minutes ago, and now, oh my God, it feels like the world is ending now all of a sudden. Is it? And then I, like, look outside, I'm like, no, we're good here in Montana. So, how do people shift from a space of fear into a space of love?
Yeah. Well, I think it comes back to an internal state. I think seeing fear in the world is way more about being afraid of what's happening inside of you. It's like just the classic, like two people can look at the same thing, a glass half full, a glass half empty. Like that is about your internal state, not about what is happening in the world around you. And so it's about being very conscious of that and taking like extreme ownership of that. Mm-hmm. And that's a huge piece. Like, can you own that what you see says more about you than what's actually going on?
Because that's what I feel, is that people are just projecting their fears out there. I honestly feel like it's one of the greatest illnesses of the time right now, is this projection of fear. And then it's like, and I feel it. I feel that fear being projected on me. And then I question myself. I'm like, oh, am I just sticking my head in the sand or whatever? And by not taking this on. So it's like I find this balance of like, okay, I hear the messages. I hear there's fear. And I'll consider that. And I'm not going to take that on. I'm still going to live in this life where that fear does not control me. But it takes like a conscious, since I'm very sensitive, it takes a very conscious effort for me to have to do that. To like, whew, I just feel their energy, and then I'm like, okay, I'm gonna move on from that. I hear it, and then I'm going to just let it move through me. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I appreciate the ownership.
Yeah. And I mean, and I guess there is a part here though that we do need to be conscious that we live in an environment and a media apparatus that is designed to sell you fear. So there is a level of like intentionally guarding your energy and being very discerning about what you let in and what you keep out. And I think that's important. And I think most people just very unconsciously consume copious amounts of information and fear without even realizing that that's what's happening, you know. So ownership of your internal state, and then intentional guarding of your energy and your attention.
You think it's good to do the intentional guarding? Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing too much of it.
I mean, yeah, like are you turning into like Bubble Boy? You're like wrapped in
I can
mattresses.
I hermit a little bit. But I'm like, okay. I'm an introvert, so I'm like, this is where I gain my energy. But it's just like, I mean, because I've also gone through a really hard time this last year, so I'm feeling extra sensitive to other people's stuff. So I'm like, okay, am I overprotecting? Then I'm like, well, but I love hanging out at home and doing yoga and meditating and reading. I'm like, maybe I should hang out with people a little more.
Yeah.
But I'm like, I don't know. People just got a lot of shit going on. So I'm just really selective. Really selective about, what energies I'm around.
Well, and maybe that's just the chapter and season that you're in, you know?
Yeah.
It's not forever.
Thanks for saying that.
Yeah.
I actually, maybe this could be a depressing question as we were talking about being optimistic and stuff, but when you mentioned consciousness, and just your deep interest in consciousness, I gotta ask, because this has been on my mind, what happens to consciousness when a body dies? What do you think?
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, so I have not studied NDEs, near-death experiences, like deeply. I intend to at some point. But I recently read a book. It's called LSD and the Mind of the Universe. And it's a really great book. It's very compelling. He summarizes a lot of the NDE literature in there. And he describes this process of like, when you die, your soul, your consciousness goes back to kind of like infinity, and it rendezvous with all the other souls that are like in your group. And they're people that you've committed to doing many, many lives with, and you've all had different experiences. You've married each other, you've been each other's, children, you've been each other's bosses. Like you've run every iteration of the human experience together. And so you reconnect with that group, and then you do like an inventory, and it's not judgmental. This isn't like the Christian version of like judgment. Okay, you can go to heaven. Okay, no, you can't. It's just a life review to just see what you learned and what you didn't learn and what you can improve upon in the next iteration. And then you just run it back. You just live another one. And I don't know if that's true or not. I loved that, probably because it aligns with some of my like deep Christian conditioning of like this afterlife place of judgment, as silly as that is. There's like something comforting about the familiar, but also that like, oh, okay, yeah, maybe you get to do it again. I fully believe that you do it again. That part I'm not very ambiguous on. I think it's the only thing that makes sense to me. Like I was saying earlier, like what else are we going to do? We're an infinite consciousness that lives forever, we just want to be in a body. And it's like an amusement park. It's like a ride, and we love it. And so we just keep doing it. And maybe it ends. Maybe there's a level where you like ascend to a next dimension and do something else. I don't know. But my sense is we spend a lot of time in this realm and we enjoy it.
I like that. I like hearing the part where we enjoy it. We just love being in the body. That's a comforting thought for me.
Yeah, totally. And then you go into a realm of like, it gets hard to talk about very quickly, because then you're like, well, did you choose your body? Did you choose your circumstance? Why are some people born into suffering? Some are not. And I've read compelling like literature both ways, saying that it all is a choice, and people are very intentionally choosing where they're born, when they're born, and what their experience is going to be, because you've lived every iteration, and we crave every iteration, good, bad, and ugly. But as you can imagine, I mean, that's a really hard conversation to have with a person who's deep in suffering or oppression or whatever it may be. And I don't know that it's that important of a thing, of a belief to have. I would never want to have that belief just to like justify horrible shit. But there's also the other side of it that's like, what if they did? And what if they did? And that affirms that their consciousness knows they are so capable of handling this. Mm-hmm. And like me as a therapist, I don't have to fix this. I don't have to get them out of this. Like, they're so capable, and that's why they're here. I just have to help them remember that.
It's something one of my friends has been saying as I've been going through a hard time this last year. She's like, I really believe the universe or God or whatever you want to call it doesn't give you what you can't handle. Mm-hmm. And so I think kind of what you're saying, like having that belief, it kind of lets go of that, oh, I need to fix this. And yeah, there's just I don't know, for me, it takes the pressure off. Yes. Having that mindset.
Yeah, that's my experience as well. Just remove some of the pressure.
Mm-hmm. Was there anything else on your heart or your mind that you're wanting to share?
I think we got to it. This is all the stuff.
Nice. Well, it's been so nice to have you on the podcast today. I really, really appreciate all the work you're doing for the world and all the messages that you're putting out there that positively impact your community and people on a larger scale that follow you on social media or wherever else you're sharing your heart. And is there, for those who are listening who are interested or curious in following your work or diving a little deeper into what you do as a human or professionally, is there a place that I could put in the show notes to link like a social media or a website?
Yeah, totally. Instagram is where I primarily spend most of my social media time. And my handle, I actually just recently changed it, but it's just _attunement. And then I have a newsletter that I write pretty regularly, like at least once a month, maybe twice a month. And I can give you the link for that if people wanted to subscribe to the newsletter.
Yes, definitely. And that reminds me, what's behind the name attunement?
Yeah, that was just a word that was like in my mind for a really long time. I kind of mentioned this in the beginning. When I started my practice, it was just Christian Snuffer coaching and counseling. When I started hiring people, I needed to kind of rebrand so it just wasn't me. And attunement was just a word that was just there, and I just couldn't, I don't know, it just wouldn't go away. And it's taken on more meaning as time has gone on, but now I just view attunement as the process of connecting to the body and understanding what's going on internally. And that's the process of attunement.
Nice.
Yeah.
That actually, not to go too far off on this, but that reminded me of an experience I had when I was in Ecuador this last year with ayahuasca. It felt like the medicine was literally tuning up my body, like a wrench, kind of like just like tightening up the screws of my spine. And it was just like I could literally like physically feel like I was getting like a tune up, like getting attuned to whatever I needed. Yes. That visual just came to me when I heard you say that. So
I love it.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for being here today and for sharing your story and your insights. And I just see you as a very beautiful, unique human with your own unique medicine. And I support you fully in your journey in this life. And yeah, I'm looking forward to all the people that will listen to this and share. And any last words from you?
Just thank you. This was really fun, really enjoyable. And I appreciate the opportunity.
If you'd like to work one-on-one with me, I am taking clients over the phone at this time. And as a coach, I don't diagnose or treat or dig into the past much, but instead I meet you with wherever you're at right now and talk about where you want to go in order to live your most inspired life. And I can help you get there with daily practices that are unique to you and how you operate so you can feel grounded and at ease while embodying your most inspired life. You can head to my website, abbyleewellness.com, to sign up or find me on the socials at Abby Lee Wellness. I love you all and see you next time.